Chapter 6. Reverend Gershom Bulkley laid down his linen napkin, pushed back his heavy chair from the table, and expanded his straining waistcoat in a satisfied sigh. A very excellent dinner, Mistress Wood. I warrant there's not a housewife in the colonies can duplicate your apple tarts. He had just better compliment that dinner, thought Kit. In preparation of it had taken the better part of 4 days. Every inch of the great kitchen had been turned inside out. The floor had been fresh sanded, the hearthstone polished, the pewter scorned. The brick oven had been heated for 2 nights in a row, and the whole family had gone without sugar since Sunday to make sure that the minister's notorious sweet tooth would be satisfied. Well, Dr. Berkeley, Dr. Buckley had been pleased, but had anyone else? Matthew Wood had eaten little and spoken scarcely a word. He sat now with his lips pressed tight together. Rachel looked tired and flustered, and even Mercy seemed unusually quiet. Only Judith had blossomed. In the candlelight she looked bewitching, and Reverend Bulkley smiled whenever he smiled whenever he looked at her. But the greatest part of his condescension he had bestowed on Kit was once he had understood that her grandfather had been Sir Francis Tyler. He himself had visited Antigua in the West Indies, he had told her, and he was acquainted with some of the plantation owners there. He went back to the subject now for the 3rd time. So, young lady, your grandfather was knighted for loyalty by King Charles, you say. A great honor, a very great honor indeed, and I take it he was a loyal subject of our good King James as well? Why, of course, sir. And you, yourself, you are a loyal subject also? How could I be otherwise, sir? Kit was puzzled. There are some who seem to find it possible, marked the minister, staring meaningfully at a ceiling beam. See that you keep your allegiance. With an abrupt scrape of wood, Matthew pushed back his chair. Her allegiance is no danger in this house, he announced angrily. What are you implying, Gershom? I meant nothing to offend you, Matthew, said the older man. Then watch your words. May I remind you, I am selectman in this town. I am no traitor. I said no such thing, nor did I mean it. Mistaken, Matthew. I hold to that, but not a traitor, yet. I am mistaken, Matthew Wood challenged him, because I do not favor knuckling under to this new king's governor. Governor Andros was appointed by King James. Massachusetts had recognized that. Well, we here in Connecticut will never recognize it, never. Do you think we have labored and sacrificed all these years to build up a free government, only to hand it over now without a murmur? I say you are mistaken, growled Gershom Bulkley. Mark my words. Matthew, if you do not live to see the evil results, your children or their children will suffer. Call it what you will, this stubbornness can lead only to revolution. Matthew's eyes dashed. There are worse things than revolution. I know more about that than you. I was a surgeon in the fort fight with the Indians. War is an evil, Matthew. Believe me, no good thing can come from bloodshed. Who is asking for bloodshed? We ask only to keep the rights that have already been granted to us in the Charter. The two men sat glaring at each other across the table. Tears sprang to Rachel's eyes. Then Mercy spoke from the shadows. I had looked forward to hearing Reverend Bulkley read to us this evening, she said gently. Dr. Bulkley sent her a gracious smile and considered. I have to coddle this throat of mine, he decided, but my young pupil here is a very exceptional reader. I shall pass the honor on to him. Grudgingly, Matthew Wood lifted the heavy Bible and placed it in John Holbrook's hand, and Rachel moved a pewter candlestick nearer to his elbow. John had respectfully been silent all the evening. Instead, he had a little opportunity to be anything else, and he now seemed pleased out of all proportion at this slight notice from his master. Kit felt suddenly provoked at him. 1 week in Wethersfield seemed to have changed the dignified young man she had known on the shipboard. Tonight, he appeared to be a shadow, hanging on every word from this pompous, opinionated man. Even now he dared not assert himself, but held the Bible uncertainly in his hands and asked, "What would you have me read, sir?" "I would suggest Proverbs 24, chapter 21st verse," said the old minister, with a canny gleam in his eye, which Kit understood as John began to read. "My son, fear the Lord and the king, and meddle not with them that are given to change, for their calamity shall rise suddenly, and who knoweth the ruin of them both?" There was a harsh sound from Matthew, checked in response to his wife's pleading eyes. John continued reading. As he read on, Kit forgot the meaning of the words and felt a stir of pleasure at the sound. John's voice was low-pitched but very clear, and the words fell with a musical cadence that was a delight. Every evening since she had come here, she had sat waiting with impatience for her uncle's monotonous voice to cease. Tonight, for the first time, she caught the beauty of the ancient Hebrew verses. When the reading was finished, family and guests bowed their heads, and Reverend Bulkley began the evening prayer. A little sigh escaped Kit. Her uncle's terse petitions were hard enough to endure. This prayer, she knew, would be a lengthy masterpiece. As the husky voice scraped inexorably on, she ventured to raise her head a little and was gratified to see that Judith, too, was peeking. But Judith's attention was not wandering. She was studying with deliberate appraisal John Holbrook's bent head and the delicate chiseled line of his profile against the firelight. A phrase of Dr. Buckley's prayer caught Kit's attention again. "And bless our sister in her weakness and affliction." Whom did he mean? Heavens, was he talking about Mercy? Had the man had no perception at all? How Mercy must be shriveling at these fulsome words. After a few days in his household, Kit had ceased to be aware of Mercy's lameness. No one in the family ever referred to it. Mercy certainly did not consider herself afflicted. She did a full day's work and more. Moreover, Kit had soon discovered that Mercy was the pivot about whom the whole household moved. She coaxed her father out of his bitter moods, upheld her timorous and anxious mother, gently restrained her rebellious sister, and had reached to draw an uncertain alien into the circle. Mercy weak? Why, the man could not even use his eyes. When the prayer was ended, the thanks repeated and the good night said, Rachel saw her guest to the door. She held out her hand to John Holbrook. "John, I hope you will come again," she said kindly. "We would like you to feel welcome in our house." John looked back to where Judith stood behind Mercy's chair. "Thank you, ma'am," he answered. "If I may, I would be very happy to come again." As the heavy door finally closed, Matthew Wood turned fiercely toward his wife. "That is the last time," he pronounced, "that I will have Gershom Buckley under my roof." "Very well, Matthew," sighed Rachel. But do not be too hard on him. Gershom is a good man, just set in his ways. He's a hypocrite and a whited sulker." Matthew's fist crashed down on the table. "And I'll have no more texts read at me in my own house." Wearily, the women set to work to clear the table, while Matthew raked up the fire in the hearth. All at once he straightened up. "There is another matter I forgot," he said. "Young William Ashby asked permission today to pay his respects to my niece." A spoon clattered from Judith's fingers. There was utter silence in the room as Rachel and both her daughters turned to stare at Kit. "You mean call on Catherine?" Aunt Rachel's voice was incredulous. "That is what I said. But he has hardly seen her, only for a moment after meeting." She was conspicuous enough. Kit felt her cheeks growing hot. Judith opened her mouth to say something, glanced at her father, and closed it again. "I suppose we can hardly refuse," ventured Rachel. He is a member of the society in good standing, and he has gone about it quite properly. His father is another king's man, said her husband. He proposed in council that we join with Massachusetts. But what can we expect now that we harbor a royalist under our own roof? Bring a candle, Rachel. We have wasted enough time for one night. A constrained trio lingered after Rachel had climbed the stairs behind her husband. Mercy began quietly to make ready her own bed in the corner. A small wrinkle of concern marred her usually placid forehead. Well, I told you so, Judith finally burst out. I knew by the way he was staring at you after meeting. There was no use to pretend she didn't remember. Kit felt a small, pleasurable stir of curiosity. Do you know him, Mercy? I know about him, of course, admitted Mercy. Who doesn't know about him? Added Judith. Who hasn't heard that his father has 3 acres of the best land set aside, and all the trees, all marked to build the house in the moment Master William makes up his mind. And he was just about to make it up, too, when you came along. We never really knew that, Judith, her sister reminded her gently. We only thought so. All at once, Kit remembered. That first morning when she was trying on the dress, Judith had said, "Oh, dear," she exclaimed in dismay. "I don't want this William to come calling on me. Why, I've only seen him once, and I couldn't think of a word to say to him if he came. I'll tell Uncle Matthew so in the morning." "Don't you dare say anything to father," Judith whirred on her. "But if you, William never asked to can on me. I just said he was getting around to it." "'Tis not quite fair, really," Mercy considered soberly, "to hold it against Kit, just because we thought—" "Oh, I'm not holding it against Kit," Judith said airily. Suddenly she tossed her head. "As a matter of fact, Kit can have William with my blessing. I've changed my mind. I'm going to marry John Holbrook." Chapter 7. What on earth could she think of to say next? Kit wondered in desperation. She sat looking down on her folded hands, reluctant to lift her eyes to the young man who sat oiled the bench across the wide hearth. She knew that when she looked up, she would find William Ashby's gaze fixed steadily upon her. For the last half-hour they sat so. When a young man came to call, what did one talk about? Was it all up to the girl? She had tried her best, but William seemed content to just sit, his back stiffly straight, his large, capable hands resting squarely on his sturdy wool-clad knees. He looked impressive in his cinnamon broadcloth coat and the fine linen shirt. His glossy beaver hat and white gloves were laid carefully on a chair near the door. William seemed to feel that merely by coming he had done his share. Apparently, it was up to her to provide the conversation. Aunt Rachel had laid a special fire in the company room and set lighted candles on the table. From the kitchen across the hall, Kit could hear the voices of the family as they sat cozily about the fire that was still welcome on these cool May evenings. Tonight, she longed to be with them. She would welcome even the Bible reading at this moment. She took a deep breath and tried again. Is it always so chilly in New England, even in May? William considered this. I think this spring is a bit warmer than usual, he decided. As though in answer to her urgent prayer for relief, a knock sounded on the door outside, and as Aunt Rachel went to answer, Kit heard John Holbrook's voice. Her aunt welcomed him cordially, and in a few moments put her head in at the parlor door. Her understanding glance taking in the 2 silent young people. "Why don't you both come and join us?" she suggested. "John Holbrook has come to call, and we'll make some popcorn for a treat." Bless Aunt Rachel. Over a handful of huffy white kernels, William relaxed a trifle. There was something irresistible about popcorn. John, his pale cheeks hushed with the heat, managed the long shaker with a practiced hand. Judith blossomed suddenly in the firelight, and her laughter was infectious. Mercy's eyes were shining with pleasure. Rachel, with a ghost of the charm she must have once possessed, succeeded in drawing William, if not actually into the circle, at least to its warm circumference. Even Matthew unbent enough to ask her courteously, "Does your father have all his field sown?" "Yes, sir," replied William. "Notice he's cutting some trees up Vexation way." "Yes, I'm planning to build my house come autumn. We have marked some good white oak for the clapboards." Kit stared at him. William had not spoken so many words all the evening. Aunt Rachel encouraged him. "My husband tells me you have been appointed a viewer of fences," she smiled. "That is a fine honor for such a young man." "Thank you, ma'am. With all the new land grants I've been hearing of, that will be an important duty," added Mercy helpfully. "Yes," agreed William. "The Assembly has voted that there should be no unclaimed land left in all Hartford County." "A wise move," put in Matthew. "Why should we leave land for the king's governor to grant to his favorites?" William turned to the older man respectfully. "Are you not afraid, sir," he asked, "that we are likely to anger the king the more by such hasty actions?" "Are you so afraid to anger the king?" scoffed Matthew. "No, sir, but we cannot hope to hold out against him. If we submit to his governor now, without a struggle, we are not more likely to retain ourselves some rights and privileges. By provoking his anger, we may lose them all." Kit could scarcely believe her ears. William Ashby was neither speechless nor dim-witted. He even dared to stand up to her uncle. With new respect, she moved to pass him the wooden bowl of popcorn, and to it she added a smile that caused him to lapse again into a scarlet-faced silence. Matthew Wood did not notice the interruption. "Surrender our charter and we lose all," he thundered. "That charter was given to Connecticut by King Charles 25 years ago. It guarantees every right and privilege we have earned, the very ground we stand on, and the laws we have made for ourselves. King James has no right to go back on his brother's pledge. What do you say, Master Holbrook, or has your teacher poisoned your mind as well?" "I believe we should keep the charter, sir." John's eyes were on the fire, and his voice sounded troubled. "But Dr. Buckley says that Connecticut has misinterpreted the charter. His knowledge of the law is so wide. He says that justice is not always served by our courts, and—" "Bah!" Matthew Wood pushed back his chair and rose to his feet. "Justice? What do you young men know about rights and justice? A soft life is all you have ever known. Have you felled the trees in a wilderness and built a home with your bare hands? Wave you fought off the wolves and the Indians? Have you frozen and starved through a single winter? The men who made this town understood justice. They knew better than to look for it in the king's favor. The only rights worth all that toil and sacrifice are the rights of free men, free and equal under God to decide their own justice. You'll learn, mark my words. Someday you'll learn to Someday you'll learn to your sorrow." He stumped off the stairs without a good night. Oh dear. Could there never be a pleasant moment without this senseless argument? After Matthew's departure, the conversation never really righted itself. Kit jumped as the square clock in the corner twagged 8 o'clock. Only 1 hour. It seemed like the longest evening she had ever lived. William rose deliberately to his feet. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mistress Wood," he said politely. John looked up, startled that the time had passed so quickly. He followed William's example. As the door shut behind their backs, a long sigh escaped Kit. "Well, that's over with," she exclaimed. "At least we won't have to go through it again." "Not till next Saturday night, at least," laughed Mercy. Sorry. Kit shook her head positively. "He'll never come again," she said. Was she altogether relieved at the thought? "Why, whatever makes you say that, child?" said Rachel, busily raking up the fire. "Couldn't you see? He hardly spoke a word to me. And then Uncle Matthew—" "Oh, they all know about father." Judith dismissed the quarrel airily. "William said he was starting to build his house, didn't he? What more could you want him to say?" "He just happened to mention that." William Ashby never just happened to mention anything in his life, said Judith. He knew exactly what he was saying. I can't see why just building a house. Don't you know anything, Kit? Scoffed Judith. William's father gave him that land 3 years ago on his 16th birthday, and William said that he would never start to build his house until his mind was made up. That's ridiculous, Judith. He couldn't mean such a thing so soon. Could he, Mercy? I'm afraid he could. Mercy smiled at her cousin's confusion. I agree that William was telling all of us, you most of all, that his mind is made up. Whether you like it or not, Kit, William is going to come courting. Seems to me you're pretty choosy, snapped Judith. Don't you know William is able to build the finest house in Weathersfield if he wants to? Does he have to keep you amused as well? Rachel put a reassuring hand on Kit's shoulder. The girls are only teasing you, Catherine, she said gently. Then you don't think... Yes, I do think William is serious, but you don't need to be worried, dear. No one is going to hurry you, least of all William himself. He is a very fine young man. Of course you feel like strangers now. I think you'll find sufficient to talk about before long. But would they? Kit wondered, climbing the stairs to bed. Her doubts persisted through the week. A second Saturday passed, and a third, and a fourth, and William's calls fell into a pattern. I shall ask Mercy to teach me to knit, Kit decided after the second Saturday, and thereafter she armed herself with wool and needles. At least they kept her hands occupied and gave her an excuse for not meeting that implacable gaze. William seemed to find nothing lacking in those evenings. For him, it was enough simply to sit across the room and look at her. It was battering, she had to admit. The most eligible bachelor in Weathersfield, and handsome, actually, in a substantial way. Sometimes she sat knitting, aware that William's eyes were on her face. She felt her breath tightening in a way that was strange and not unpleasant. Then, just as suddenly, rebellion would rise in her. He was so sure, without even asking. He was reckoning on her as deliberately as he calculated his growing pile of lumber. Perhaps she would not have thought about William so much had there been anything else to break the long, monotonous stretch from Saturday to Saturday. It was incredible that every day should be the same, buried only in the work that filled every hour from sunrise to dark. Surely, as seemed, there must come a moment when all the tasks would be done and some brief leisure time earned, yet always a new chore loomed ahead. A shearing had brought veritable mountain of gray wool to be washed and bleached and dyed, enough to keep Mercy carding and spinning and weaving for the next 12 months. There was water to draw and linen to scrub, and everlastingly, the endless rows of vegetables to weed and hoe. Kit had not found a single one of these tasks to her liking. Her hands were unskillful, not so much from inability as from the rebellion that stiffened her fingers. She was Catherine Tyler. She had not been reared to do the work of slaves, and William Ashby was the only person in Weathersfield who did not expect her to be useful, who demanded nothing and offered his steady admiration as proof that she was still of some worth. No wonder that she found herself looking forward to Saturday evening.